A black family of 4 walks into a white tablecloth restaurant in Charleston, quiet, proud, dressed in their Sunday best. They've come to celebrate their daughter's full-ride scholarship to Stanford, but before they even sit, the white waiter sizes them up. He greets them with a forced smile, then rolls his eyes as they ask for water to start. Loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, he mutters, "Here come the cheap ones." A few customers chuckle. Others just look away. When the family doesn't react, he grows bolder, ignoring their table, joking with others, and calling them window diners. The daughter keeps her eyes forward. Her father clenches his hands beneath the table. The boy whispers, "Did we do something wrong?" But no one answers. What the waiter doesn't know. The water he mocked them for, the free glass he saw as proof they didn't belong, was poured inside a building that man helped finance. And the girl he humiliated? She's about to leave a note and a tip so large this restaurant, and his, will never forget her name. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. They had never planned to eat somewhere like this. Not really. Not the kind of place where the menus had no prices, and the waitstaff wore ties tighter than their smiles. But today was different. Today was about honoring something bigger than food or comfort. It had taken 15 years of discipline, late-night studying, and early morning commutes for this moment to arrive. A full ride to Stanford, tuition, room, board, books, all covered. Their daughter, just 17, had worked in silence, skipping dances and social media trends, choosing instead the quiet company of scholarship essays and library corners. Her parents, both public servants, her father a bank loan officer, her mother a city clerk, had done the same in their own way. Stretching paychecks, driving used cars, passing on vacations so she could have a laptop that didn't freeze during exams. Charleston had changed around them. Once a city lined with black-owned homes and churches, it had been reshaped by developers and rising rents. The building they were walking into now, this glass-paneled, plant-hanging, jazz-playing restaurant, was erected on land that once belonged to freed black families after emancipation. Her great-grandfather had lived 2 streets over before being forced out during redevelopment in the 80s. And now, here they were again, walking inside not with resentment, but with grace. The father had approved the original commercial loan for the property years ago. He had signed paperwork on that very structure, but he had never stepped foot inside, until now. The restaurant smelled of citrus and rosemary. The floorboards creaked just slightly with age, a nod to the building's salvaged roots. At the entrance, the host looked up and blinked twice as if surprised. The father nodded politely. The mother smiled, her purse clutched gently at her side. Their son, just 10, looked around wide-eyed, marveling at the velvet chairs and the golden light. They were seated in a corner booth near a window, a small patch of sun falling across the table. The daughter sat up straight, her acceptance letter still folded inside her bag. She hadn't wanted a party. She didn't like attention. But when her father had suggested a quiet brunch, somewhere nice, she nodded. The menu was unfamiliar. Small plates, truffle oils, imported words. But they didn't come to eat extravagantly. They just wanted to mark this moment, together. When the white waiter approached, they smiled, unaware of the judgment already forming behind his eyes. He glanced at their shoes, their hands, their skin. Then he greeted them with that tone, sharp around the edges, just enough to bruise. When they asked for water to start, he raised one brow. "Just water?" he repeated. The mother nodded gently. For now, he walked away without another word. Their son looked up. Was he mad? No, the father said. Just busy. But the daughter saw it. The tilt in the waiter's lip. The way he leaned in to whisper to the table next to theirs. She noticed everything. And though her hands stayed still, her mind was already turning. This day was supposed to be about her future. But now it was becoming something else. A quiet test. A reckoning with the world that still struggled to make room for people like them, even in buildings they helped build. The first 20 minutes passed like slow drips from a cracked faucet, awkward silence and unfinished glances. The family sat patiently, hands folded, water glasses untouched except by the boy who sipped quietly between questions about what brioche meant. The waiter returned just once, to drop a single menu with a shrug. "Still looking?" he said, eyes already moving elsewhere. The mother reached for the laminated sheet, but he was gone before her hand touched it. A couple seated nearby, a white man in salmon shorts and a woman in pearls, snickered quietly when he passed. She leaned in and whispered something. The waiter grinned wide and laughed, slapping his notepad against his thigh. From the kitchen, plates clattered. Servers bustled by, delivering omelets crowned with edible flowers and mugs of imported tea. Yet no one stopped at their table. No refill of water, no offer of bread, not even a glance. As if their presence was a problem yet to be solved. The daughter's shoulders stayed square, posture unshaken. She rested her chin lightly on her fingers, watching everything. The body language, the smirks, the whispered jokes. Her father had once told her, "People show you who they are when they think no one important is watching." She had never forgotten that. The injustice was not loud, it was precise. 1,000 tiny exclusions carried out with professional skill. The waiter didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply made them invisible. The manager walked past their table twice, on his way to the wine rack, on his way to the register, but he never paused. The mother tried to catch his eye, her smile soft but steady. He nodded once, distant, then looked away as if she'd asked him to cover a shift. At a nearby table, a family of tourists arrived. Within 90 seconds, they had menus, silverware, and 2 glasses of rosé. The mother glanced down at her own lap. Still no napkin. The son leaned close to his sister. "Are we in the wrong place?" She didn't answer. She didn't want to lie to him. The father placed a hand on the boy's back, firm, grounding. "You belong wherever your feet stand," he said, his voice barely above breath. But his jaw had tightened now. His fingers drummed once on the table, then stopped. Across the room, the waiter broke into exaggerated laughter, tossing a cloth towel over his shoulder like a sitcom caricature. "Some folks just come in for the air conditioning," he said loudly, not looking at them, but not needing to. A few heads turned. One older white woman gave the family a pitying glance, then quickly looked away. Another diner narrowed his eyes, as if considering something, then returned to his quiche. The mother reached into her purse and slowly pulled out a small tube of hand cream. Her hands shook slightly as she rubbed them together. She didn't speak. Still, they stayed. "Dee," was the daughter who finally moved. She stood, excused herself with a nod, and walked toward the back of the room. On her way, she passed the service station and reached quietly for an unused receipt folder resting atop a silver tray. No one noticed. She slid it into her pocket and returned to the table. By now, the sun outside had shifted. Their booth sat in a sliver of light that framed their stillness in gold. They hadn't eaten. They hadn't complained. But somehow, they had been branded unworthy of being served. The daughter reached for her backpack and pulled out her notebook. It was filled with ideas, business plans, quotes, notes from past mentors. She tore a single page from the back and folded it twice. Then she removed her wallet and slid a debit card inside the folder, along with the note. She tucked the folder beside her plate and closed her eyes briefly. The father saw it, but said nothing. The mother reached across and squeezed her daughter's hand once, long enough to say, "I see you." A group of servers burst into laughter near the hostess stand. The waiter pointed toward their table and whispered again, but this time one of the younger servers looked uncomfortable, shifting her feet. She glanced toward the family, then looked at the floor. Still, no one came. The boy finally spoke again. "Can we go home now?" His sister nodded. They stood slowly, rising with the kind of grace that didn't need explanation. No angry words, no dramatic exit. Just the quiet decision of people who knew their worth and were choosing not to beg for acknowledgement. As they turned to leave, the daughter made sure the folder stayed behind. It would be the only thing they left on the table. They stood by the table for a moment longer, not out of hesitation but out of quiet refusal to leave, bowed. Still no food, not a single plate. The waiter finally reappeared, glancing toward their section with deliberate disinterest. He walked past briskly, then doubled back, pretending to notice them for the first time in nearly 45 minutes. He let out a theatrical sigh. "Oh, y'all still here?" he said, tone flat as tile. The boy blinked. The mother touched his shoulder gently, a signal to stay calm. The waiter scratched the back of his neck and added, "I figured you just came in for the free air conditioning. That's what some folks do on Sundays." The silence that followed was thick, impossible to miss. A woman at a nearby table set down her fork. Another man raised his eyebrows, frozen in mid-sip. No one spoke. No one stood. But something shifted. The room grew colder, not because of the air, but because something sacred had just been crossed. The father didn't look up. His jaw remained locked, knuckles pale as he gripped the edge of the table. His silence held weight, a silence that screamed, "You will not make me small in front of my children." The mother's eyes shimmered, blinking back something ancient and weary. Still, she didn't cry. She never cried in public. The daughter didn't flinch. She turned her head, met the waiter's gaze just once. Then calmly, without raising her voice or changing her posture, she asked, "Can we have the bill, please?" Request landed like a gavel. The waiter blinked, caught off guard by her poise, her clarity. For a second, he almost seemed unsure. Then he smirked, shrugged, and walked away. He returned a minute later and dropped the black checkbook onto the table, the plastic corner skidding against the wood. There was no total, no receipt, just a blank space and a pen. They hadn't eaten. They hadn't ordered, but still the bill had been delivered, as if the absence of food had been their fault. The daughter took the folder she had prepared earlier and slid it gently across the table, placing it directly over the waiter's copy. Her fingers brushed the surface once before she stood. The family rose as one. No sound, no scene. They walked toward the front, and for the first time, eyes followed them not with judgment, but with recognition. On the way out, the daughter paused, briefly by the hostess stand. She leaned in close to the young woman there and asked, "Is your manager available?" Her tone remained calm, her back straight. The hostess nodded quickly and stepped aside. The manager emerged from a side door, adjusting his tie, already wearing the practiced smile of corporate hospitality. But the daughter didn't offer him a smile in return. She said something quiet, measured, just for his ears. He nodded once, then again. Then his expression shifted, subtle, but sincere. She didn't wait for a reply. By the time the manager looked toward the dining area, the family was already outside. The glass door closed softly behind them, and at the far table the black folder remained untouched, sitting there like a sealed envelope, waiting to be opened, waiting to speak. The waiter didn't rush to clear their table. He moved slowly, still, riding the energy of his own arrogance. He laughed once more with a coworker behind the bar, tossing his apron over one shoulder like he owned the room. To him, the table had been a waste of time. No entrees, no drinks, no tip. He grabbed the check folder with one hand, already turning away, expecting to find nothing but a blank space and perhaps a scribbled complaint. But then his steps stopped. Mid-turn. Inside the folder was a folded sheet of cream-colored paper, and beneath it, pressed against the leather lining, was a debit receipt, signed and approved. The tip line read, $10,000. His hand shook slightly. His eyes darted across the floor, searching for the family, but they were gone. The daughter's handwriting, neat, confident, was addressed directly to him. He opened the letter. It was brief, but it cut clean. "You laughed at our water, but you don't know what it cost us to get here. My father financed this building. My mother served this city longer than you've had a job. And me? I'm the reason we came today. I just earned a scholarship to Stanford, so this table, the one you ignored, was the most valuable one you served all week. The difference is we don't need to be seen to know our worth, but now you'll remember us every time someone asks for water." He read it again, slower this time. And then, once more hoping it would say something else, it didn't. He looked around. Servers had noticed his stillness. One of them, a young Latina girl in a ponytail, peeked over his shoulder. She gasped quietly, eyes wide at the number. The manager walked up behind them, lips already pursed. He took the letter, scanned it once, and looked out the restaurant window where the family had just disappeared into sunlight. No one spoke for a full minute. In the background, music played, soft jazz nearly drowned by the silence swelling at their table. Even diners began to stir. The couple in pearls whispered. The man who'd furrowed his brow earlier now leaned forward, sensing something had shifted. The manager placed the letter on the bar and pressed his hand flat against it. "I'll handle this," he said quietly. Then he turned to the waiter. "Go home now." The waiter opened his mouth, maybe to protest, but nothing came out. He blinked, stunned, not at the punishment, but at the reality that he had missed the bigger story. He wasn't the center. Not today. He left without another word, apron folded, in his hands like a flag of retreat. Meanwhile, at the front of the restaurant, a family waited to be seated. The hostess, visibly shaken, gently asked for a moment before taking them in. She looked toward the table in the corner, the one no one had touched, and quietly placed 4 new menus down beside the check folder, as if to honor what had just happened there. The daughter's letter stayed open, for anyone to read. A woman, from the back, rose from her table and walked over. She didn't speak, but she picked up the note and read it through glassy eyes. Then, without fanfare, she left a $20 bill on the corner of the folder and walked out. A small ripple. Quiet. But something had begun. Have you ever been judged for how you look or where you're from? Share your story in the comments. We're listening. By the next morning, the letter had left the table and entered the world. It started with a photo. The young hostess, unable to shake the weight of what she had witnessed, snapped a picture of the folded note before the manager quietly tucked it away. She didn't caption it with outrage or hashtags. She simply wrote, "They never even got their food." Within hours, the post traveled from her private page to the city's community boards, then to local reporters. By noon, it had been shared over 2,000 times, then picked up by a major Charleston outlet by evening. People wanted the whole story. And they got it. Readers learned that the girl in the letter, whose name surfaced quickly through mutual shares and proud classmates, was not only a Stanford-bound senior, but also the youngest winner of a National Public Service Fellowship. That her essay, written just months prior, was titled, "Silence is a Weapon." That her father had in fact approved the very commercial redevelopment loan for the block the restaurant stood on, and that the $10,000 she left behind was from her scholarship stipend, a portion meant for travel and technology. Money she had, decided in that moment, could buy more than just a new laptop. It could buy clarity. The restaurant's name flooded local search bars. Thousands of reviews poured in, not all angry but reflective. Some customers admitted they'd noticed the bias before but hadn't spoken up. Others shared similar stories. Slow service, sharp tones, tables skipped over. The behavior wasn't new, but this time it had been documented, measured, answered. By the next day, the restaurant's manager released a formal apology. But it wasn't the usual corporate statement. He admitted fault, publicly confirmed the waiter had been terminated, announced that a third-party racial bias consultant would review all staff policies. Mandatory anti-bias training would begin that week. More quietly, he reached out to the family through mutual contacts and offered them a private apology. And a year of free dining. Anytime, any day, no reservations required. They declined. Not out of anger, but because the point had never been about revenge or free meals. It had been about a table they were never truly served at, and the dignity they brought to it anyway. The waiter, now anonymous, gave a short interview to a small blog under the condition his name wouldn't be used. He called it a misunderstanding. Said he was overwhelmed that day, claimed he never meant to offend, but the truth had already unfolded without him. In the days that followed, the daughter received hundreds of messages. Some were from other students who had been dismissed. In similar ways, others came from restaurant workers across the country, servers who said they'd printed out her note and taped it in their kitchens. The ripple had widened. She was invited to speak at a national youth leadership summit. The invitation came from a senator's office, who'd read her letter and wanted her voice included in a new racial equity task force. On stage, she didn't name the restaurant, or the city, or even the waiter. She spoke instead about presence, about how people can sit in a room and still be erased, how worth isn't given by uniforms or menus or job titles, but by history, effort, and grace. She ended with a line that was later quoted across media platforms. Dignity doesn't ask to be seen, but it never leaves quietly. The applause didn't erupt. It built slowly, a standing ovation that grew not from volume, but from shared understanding. Meanwhile, back in Charleston, the building didn't crumble. The restaurant didn't close. But something had shifted. A policy review was initiated citywide. Business owners were encouraged to undergo their own staff bias audits. A coalition of Black professionals, including the girl's father, formed a local alliance to support equity. In service industries, they named it the Table Initiative, because everyone deserves a seat, and not just to sit, but to be served. The headlines eventually faded, but the memory stayed. Weeks passed, then months. Charleston moved on, as cities do. New stories took the place of old ones, but for those who had witnessed the quiet unraveling of bias inside a restaurant booth, something deeper had taken root. Change had arrived, not with noise, but with steadiness. The restaurant kept its doors open, but nothing inside remained untouched. Staff turnover followed, not from forced firings, but from self-selection. Some servers resigned quietly, unable to adapt to the new expectations. Others stayed, committed to the change. They took part in the mandatory anti-bias workshops. They listened to community speakers. They sat through role-play sessions where they had to serve people they once overlooked and reflect afterward in writing. In the front lobby, where a wine rack once stood, the management installed a framed display. A plaque etched with the words "Seen, Served, Respected," dedicated to the communities who made this block possible. Beside it, under glass, sat a facsimile of the original note. The amount, $10,000, was blacked out, but the words were left untouched. Raw, honest, final. Visitors paused to read it on. Their way in. Some grew quiet, a few teared up, and more than once new guests, black, brown, young, old, would request that same corner table, just to sit where it happened, not to relive it, but to reclaim it. Elsewhere in the city, the ripple kept moving. The Table Initiative, founded by the girl's father and a coalition of Black professionals, launched a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs of color. They began offering grants for small food service startups led by underrepresented communities. Their first grant went to a young chef who had once been turned away from a fine dining internship for having the wrong look. The family never sought attention again. They gave no follow-up interviews. When asked, they simply said they were grateful for the conversation that followed and hoped it would lead to fewer stories like theirs. But their daughter's impact could not be boxed away. At Stanford, she was chosen to serve as the student body's liaison for diversity and equity policy. When asked why she took the role, she said, "Because I've sat at tables where I was ignored. I'd rather build ones where no one has to earn their right to be seen." And still, she remained who she'd always been, quiet, focused, steady. She did not profit from her moment. She used it. Back home, the boy, now 11, walked taller. In class, he gave a presentation about what it means to be visible. He didn't mention the restaurant. He didn't have to. His final slide showed a picture of a glass of water, sitting alone on a white cloth napkin. The teacher asked what it meant. He smiled and said, "That's what dignity looks like." Customers who once dined without thinking began to notice things. Which tables got checked on? Whose names were remembered? Who got menus first? And slowly, gently, the patterns began to shift. Other restaurants followed suit. A local bistro introduced a bias feedback box. A bakery on the east side asked the table initiative to help them rework their hiring process. Even a high-end hotel chain reached out to begin internal reforms, citing the story as a cultural turning point. Justice didn't arrive all at once. It didn't look like a courtroom or a camera crew. It looked like menus being handed out in the correct order, like eye contact, like silence being broken not with shouting but with presence. The family never returned to that restaurant, not because they held bitterness, but because they had already received what they came for. Not a meal, not recognition, but proof. Proof that sometimes the most powerful thing you can leave behind isn't noise, but a note. It is a warm afternoon when another black family steps through the doors of that same restaurant. They are greeted with eye contact, smiles, menus placed carefully in front of each guest. The waiter, young, soft-spoken, pours 4 glasses of water without hesitation. No one rolls their eyes. No one walks away. The family thanks him. He nods. They don't know the story that came before them, not all of it. But the space feels different, calmer, more aware. Near the entrance, a small girl looks up at the wall where the framed plaque hangs. She reads the words slowly. Seen, served, respected. Her father watches her, says nothing, just lets the moment settle in. In the far corner, unnoticed by most, sits a young woman sipping iced tea, hair pulled back, notebook open. She's home from college for the summer, finishing an essay. No one knows who she is. She watches the water being poured, the hands that now serve with care, and she smiles. Only once, only briefly, because that table is no longer empty, and it never will be again. If this story moved you, share it with someone who's ever felt unseen. Let's build more tables where no one's dignity is left behind. Change starts with who we choose to serve, and how. A black family walks into a high-end restaurant to celebrate their daughter's scholarship to Stanford. But instead of being honored, they're mocked for simply ordering water. The waiter laughs. The diners stare. No one steps in. But what the waiter doesn't know? That girl is about to leave a $10,000 tip and a note that will change everything. This is not just a story. It's a mirror. A moment that reveals how quiet dignity can shake the ground. From Charleston's past to one young woman's powerful future, this story shows how true strength doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand. Comment below if you've ever felt invisible in a place you had every right to be. Subscribe for more emotional stories about justice, racism, and quiet power in everyday life.